But in the interest of time that we have today with the administrator, I'd like to turn immediately to her keynote for this afternoon. I want to just take a minute to introduce who you all probably know already. But Dr. Jane Lubchenco, of course, is the current Undersecretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere and NOAA Administrator. Dr. Lubchenco was sworn in on March 20th as the 9th and first woman administrator of NOAA. We congratulate her on that. Administrator Lubchenco was raised in a favorite part of the country for me, Denver. She received her BA from Colorado College in Colorado Springs and a Master's of Science in Zoology from the University of Washington. And of course, her PhD from Harvard University. As probably many of you know, Dr. Lubchenco has served on several important scientific boards and associations and have provided scientific input into multiple U.S. administrative and congressional hearings and sojourns on climate, fisheries, marine ecosystems, and biodiversity. She's received numerous awards, including a MacArthur Genius Fellowship, 12 honorary degrees, the 2002 Heinz Award in Environment, the 2005 AAAS Award for Public Understanding of Science and Technology. I think we all know how important that is. And the 2008 Zayed International Prize for Environment. She recently was named in journal, by Nature Journal, the 2010 Newsmaker of the Year. We congratulate you on that. She has a special interest, of course, in the Arctic ecosystems, with recent work in Svalbard, Greenland, and in the Alaskan Arctic. Welcome, Administrator Lubchenco.
Thank you, David. I appreciate very much the opportunity to join all of you today. As you know, as many of you know, I had the opportunity to participate on the Aspen Institute Commission on Arctic Climate Change for approximately 1 year. When I was named Administrator of NOAA, I had to step down from that, and so I'm very excited actually to see the conclusion of that effort. I'm delighted to be here today not only to celebrate the launch of the Commission's report, but in concert with that, to share with you a report that we are releasing today, NOAA's Arctic Vision and Strategy. And so we're essentially releasing two complementary reports today. The time that I've spent in the Arctic of Alaska, Greenland, and Svalbard, as David has mentioned, both on the land as well as on the water, and the interactions that I've had with many of the native peoples in those regions, have greatly enriched my appreciation of the Arctic's abundant natural resources, the unique wildlife, the proud local natives and other local people, and also emphasized how uncertain their collective future is. I think everyone recognizes that the Arctic is changing dramatically. When I was in Barrow, for example, in 2009, I stood on the shores of the Arctic Ocean along with school children and local elders whose mouths were wide open in astonishment as they watched the pounding surf come ashore in Barrow. The elders told me that this was unprecedented because until recently, sea ice offshore worked to dissipate any waves that were coming across long open stretches from storms that were generated someplace else. And so surf in Barrow, until relatively recently, has not been a common phenomenon. So the surf that we noticed, that we witnessed there, was both novel and noteworthy. It is one of the indicators of change. We also visited nearby grave sites that were being relocated because the places where bodies had originally been buried are on a spit of land that is now being eroded at a pretty rapid clip in response to wave action and pounding surf. On the west coast of Alaska, entire villages such as Shishmaref, where my lovely bracelet is from, they have just some amazing artists there, they are facing evacuation and relocation as the combination of melting sea ice, thawing permafrost, and higher storm surges undermine the town's infrastructure. And as we meet here today, NOAA is briefing the Department of Defense on preparations for relocating another native village, Nutuk, which is being forced to move due to severe erosion and flooding. Across the Arctic, Inuit in Greenland described to me increasing numbers of tragic disasters, often involving loss of family and friends, who went out hunting and never returned. They explained that sea ice and weather conditions are changing so rapidly that the familiar signs of danger no longer apply. The native peoples of the Arctic have amassed a wealth of knowledge that has served them in good stead over generations, allowing their cultures and communities to flourish. They have attuned themselves to the environment and have adapted to many changes over the centuries. Now, however, their environment is transforming so rapidly that it is hard to keep up with the signs of change. Their experiences are borne out by data. In 4 of the last 5 years, we have witnessed the lowest sea ice extents on record, as well as a 35% decrease in thicker multi-year sea ice. Recent Arctic temperature increases are more than double those found at lower latitudes. And in fact, the Arctic's 2008 annual mean air temperature over land was the 4th warmest on record and is part of a long-term upward trend. We're seeing shifts in ocean ecosystems from the Aleutian Islands to Barrow and across the Arctic Ocean due to a combination of Arctic warming, natural variability, and sensitivity to changing sea ice conditions. When children in Barrow are captivated by waves crashing on the shore, we need to pay attention. When polar bears and ice seals are increasingly threatened with extinction, we need to pay attention. And when the abundance and location of fish and other marine life changes, we need to pay attention. As we gather here today, we cannot turn back the clock on the changes that have already occurred, nor can we flip a switch to prevent anything else from happening. But there are things that we can do to confront, learn from, mitigate, and adapt to change in the Arctic. Some of the things that we can do include reduce greenhouse gas emissions, engage Native peoples in the Arctic dialogue and respect their values and knowledge, establish a framework for responsible decision-making, conduct the scientific research and monitoring necessary to support these decisions, consider the Arctic holistically, using ecosystem-based approaches to a management framework, and employ a precautionary approach with the goal of maintaining resilience in this coupled human-natural system. The Aspen Institute Commission on Arctic Climate Change has heard this call for action, and I applaud its report, The Shared Future, because it focuses squarely on issues of enormous national and international importance. NOAA, too, has responded to the changes underway, and we have developed our own response, the NOAA Arctic Vision and Strategy. These parallel reports are no coincidence. We are both responding to the same unmistakable cues from a changing environment, the needs of the people who live and work there, and the interests of the entire world who are affected by what happens in the Arctic. The debate over climate change in the Arctic is over. Climate change is happening. The Arctic Ocean is warming. Permafrost is thawing. Sea ice is melting at an alarming rate, and the shorelines are eroding. People's lives and livelihoods, as a result, are being impacted. And it's not just people in the Arctic whose lives are being impacted. What happens in the Arctic does not stay there. The impacts witnessed by locals across the Arctic have global implications. The Arctic, for example, acts as a thermostat that helps stabilize the Earth's climate and regulate global temperatures. The Arctic also acts as a barometer of change, and the climate changes already apparent in the Arctic portend our global future. As sea ice retreats and the Arctic becomes more accessible, we are seeing a corresponding growth in international and domestic Arctic interests. Pressure is increasing on our defense and security assets to maintain a response-ready presence in the region. Private interests are anticipating an open Arctic trade route in the future, and further investments in oil and gas exploration in both the Chukchi and the Beaufort Seas are planned for 2012 and beyond. But while the loss of sea ice creates opportunities for commercial enterprise, these same economic growth opportunities have the potential to threaten Arctic ecosystems, communities, and cultures already affected by the rapidly changing climate. Therefore, understanding and effectively managing the changing ecosystems, expectations, and the opportunities in the Arctic requires a solid foundation of ecological and socioeconomic information. Yet despite the wealth of traditional ecological knowledge, exploration, and research to date, even the most basic data are often lacking. We need to mobilize our efforts in the Arctic and commit to fully strengthening the science that underpins the decision-making and supporting services that are required for sound Arctic stewardship and enhanced national security, the pillars that support regional prosperity as well as national economy. NOAA envisions an Arctic where decisions and actions related to conservation, management, and resource use are based on sound science and support healthy, productive, and resilient communities and ecosystems. NOAA envisions an Arctic where the global implications of Arctic change are better understood and predicted. NOAA's Arctic Vision and Strategy is a dynamic, living document that seeks to realize this vision by building on its past work in the region, as well as other governmental initiatives, including the U.S. Arctic Region Policy and the Interagency Ocean Policy Task Force and the Arctic Council. The Aspen Institute report and NOAA's Arctic Vision and Strategy, while different in scope and breadth, have synergies that will help achieve Arctic stewardship and national security objectives. The Aspen Institute Commission report provides a set of dialogue principles and recommendations for governance and sustainable management of Arctic marine resources. Many of these principles and recommendations, such as the call for an ecosystem and science-based management, support the Ocean Policy Task Force's call for better conservation, protection, and sustainable management of Arctic coastal and ocean resources. The Aspen Institute report also calls for cooperation among Arctic states and national and international policy dialogue. This call echoes that of the Ocean Policy Task Force as well, which encourages new collaborations and partnerships to monitor and assess environmental conditions in the Arctic. NOAA is involved in many of these collaborations and intends to continue on that path. The Aspen Institute report also provides broad and comprehensive overarching framework for approaching the challenges we face in the Arctic. NOAA's vision and strategy is complementary to the Aspen report, focusing on execution and prioritizing agency goals based on needs and the recognition of a limited resource base. NOAA's approach is strategic and leverages the strengths of both the agency and international, federal, state, local, and native partners and stakeholders. Specifically, NOAA seeks to realize its vision by focusing on 6 priority goals, including forecasting sea ice, strengthening foundational science to understand and detect Arctic change and ecosystem change, improving weather and water forecasts and warnings, enhancing international and national partnerships, improving stewardship and management of ocean and coastal resources in the Arctic, and finally, advancing resilient and healthy Arctic communities and economies. These 6 priority goals were chosen because they meet 2 key criteria. First, they provide information, knowledge, and policies necessary to meet NOAA's mandates and stewardship responsibilities. And second, they provide information, knowledge, and services that will enable others to live and operate safely in the Arctic. Embracing these 6 priority goals provides NOAA with a holistic approach to addressing climate change in the Arctic. We need such an approach to ensure the continued health of this remote and fragile region. But embracing all 6 goals fully will take time. So that we do not lose any precious time and in parallel with other U.S. government actions, NOAA is hitting the ground running by focusing on its 3 highest priority areas for execution in 2011. First, marine weather and sea ice forecasting. Secondly, a distributed biological observatory. And third, geospatial infrastructure in support of marine transportation, oil spill response, and community resilience. The first priority goal is marine weather and sea ice forecasting. Continued rapid loss of sea ice will be a major driver of large changes across the Arctic, and is the organizing principle of NOAA's Arctic vision and strategy. The loss of sea ice affects marine transportation and safety, regional weather, ecosystem change, and coastal communities. So accurately forecasting this depends on the ability of NOAA and its partners to deploy a number of sensing devices, from buoys and satellites to airborne reconnaissance. Through enhanced scientific research and modeling, we will provide accurate, quantitative, daily to decadal sea ice projections and improved weather forecasts in support of safe Arctic operations and ecosystem stewardship. NOAA's second priority goal is a distributed biological observatory that includes shipboard sampling and long-term community-based research on plankton, fisheries, seabirds, and marine mammals. Such sustained observation will enable researchers to observe how the loss of sea ice, ocean acidification, and sea surface temperatures affect the Arctic ecosystems over time. This information will inform our ecosystem stewardship responsibilities and ensure the sustainability of fish stocks and protected resources in a changing Arctic. Ideally, this distributed biological observatory will be part of a broader international open source network that facilitates exchange of information needed for Arctic management and effective long-term governance. The final priority goal for 2011 is improved geospatial infrastructure. Currently, Alaska has limited geospatial infrastructure, sparse tide, current, and water level prediction coverage, obsolete shoreline and hydrographic data, poor nautical charts, and inadequate oil spill response capability. Modernizing the Arctic geospatial framework will provide the foundation for many of our activities in the region, including safe marine transportation, effective climate adaptation, and community and economic resilience. Research about the behavior of oil on ice will help guide energy development in the region and protect Arctic marine ecosystems in the event of a spill. Overall, the establishment of adequate geospatial and informational infrastructure will help inform management and policy decisions that seek to balance economic development with ecosystem protection and cultural heritage. Throughout all of these efforts, NOAA intends to engage in domestic and international partnerships to promote cooperation and data sharing, and we will fully engage Arctic residents, including Native Alaskan communities, in planning for the region's future. The Arctic's harsh exterior belies an inherent fragility. The Arctic is changing, and it's changing rapidly. All of us gathered in the room here recognize the critical need to assess and address directly the drivers of change in the Arctic, as well as to increase our understanding of Arctic climate change and its impacts. Again, what happens in the Arctic does not stay in the Arctic. The Arctic is our last oceanic frontier. Every other ocean basin on the planet has been inadvertently overfished, polluted, or otherwise degraded. As we strive to recover those oceans, to restore them to some semblance of their former splendor, the Arctic Ocean provides us with one last chance, one final opportunity to get it right the first time around. This is our challenge and our hope. Much remains to be done, but through efforts like NOAA's Vision and Strategy, which is available online at arctic.noaa.gov, and the Aspen Institute Commission on Arctic Climate Change, we are facing that challenge head-on. Through these efforts, we can help ensure that the global implications of Arctic climate change are better understood and predicted, and that decisions and actions related to conservation, management, and resource use are firmly grounded in science and support healthy, productive, and resilient communities and ecosystems. Through such actions, we can ensure that we get it right in the Arctic. Thanks again for the opportunity to join you. I apologize I'm not going to be able to stay the full time and hear everyone's wonderful comments. My congratulations and thanks to the to the Aspen Institute and to the commissioners and various folks who participated in this report. I'm delighted to have an opportunity to share these thoughts and also announce the conclusion of our, or announce the release of our report today. Some of the folks in the room here were on the NOAA team. Were those of you who have been involved in the strategy, just raise your hands so that we know who they are. Doug DeMaster has been a key person, Monica Medina. There are a number of others who have been intimately involved, and I thank them for their efforts. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Jen. I want to thank you, Administrator Lubchenco, too, for drawing the parallels between these two important reports. I think that it's not obvious sometimes in talking about the Arctic and talking about management and governance issues. It's a very tricky area to navigate and to discuss in a way that people will find understandable. So thank you very much for that. We do have a little bit of time for a couple of questions for the Administrator, and then she'll have to leave. So I want to pause before we move on into the agenda to see if there are questions from the group here, the audience. I have a question. There's a lot in your report, and I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but you made reference to an issue, a dynamic, if you will, that was present throughout our dialogue and very difficult for us to organize. And that is the concept that there's a lot of information out there in terms of ice science, climate science, community resilience, environmental, ecological issues, economic activity. One of the things that we discovered, I think you'll recall, is that that information isn't very well connected. You can't find it in one place. And many sectors are working in complete kind of absence of another or knowledge of another. You used the term open source, and I have to understand that that must have been deliberate. Could you just say a little bit about how you came to that conclusion within NOAA as well?
We believe that having access to all the information that is available, easy access, and have information that is understandable is in everyone's interest. And creating mechanisms for sharing information, accessing it easily, is something that we need to make a conscious effort to work toward. We at NOAA commit to being as open and transparent as possible, making all of our information available. But we are only doing a small amount of vast research that is underway, and we need better mechanisms so that everyone knows what's happening and knows what kind of information exists. So this is flagging a need that has not yet been met. We are committed to helping to fulfill that gap. And I think that's an appropriate topic for further discussion.
Your Arctic vision, NOAA's vision for the Arctic, obviously has some importance for the Arctic Ministerial and the Arctic Council. How does that get communicated from what is your kind of, I don't want to say domestic, but is you're within the State Department, but you also have this administration that looks a lot at what we do here in the United States. How do we communicate that, or how do you communicate that internationally?
I think there are multiple opportunities for sharing information within the different, within the different departments and agencies in the federal government. There is an interagency mechanism for having that dialogue. So one type of information is across agencies. The other is much broader communication with outside of agencies, not only within the U.S. but internationally as well. I don't. Kelly, are you going to be saying anything about the interagency dialogue that's ramping up in terms of it? So Kelly will mention that. But also Dave Balton, I think, is a key player here in terms of helping to not only coordinate within the U.S. government, but within the State Department, acting as a focal point to international sharing of information. So Dave, if you would like to comment either now or later.
Maybe later would be fine, but
okay.
Yes, we stand ready.
It's not lost on me that I'm sitting between two pillars of ocean science at all. I think, Dr. Earle, you have a question for Dr. Lubchenco.
Yes, I wonder if you would be willing to elaborate a little bit more about plans for exploring this heretofore unknown, inaccessible ocean, knowing that only once has anyone been to the real North Pole, when the mirror subs from Russia went there in 2007. The access is still tricky, but with the great incentive now to explore, what efforts are being brought to bear through NOAA and perhaps through cooperation to really aggressively get the background information, the basis, the exploration that is needed before wise decisions can be made.
Sylvia, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us here today, and thanks for your leadership on these and so many other important issues. There is great interest on the part of scientists within NOAA, certainly, and all scientists funded by the National Science Foundation, but also others in other agencies, as well as, you know, a very large academic community, and that's only within the U.S., to do a lot more exploration and understanding the research and the monitoring to really understand how this dynamic system works, how it's changing, how we can do a better job of monitoring it. Our interest, our questions far exceed the capacity to do so in terms of even just the research vessels that are available and that are capable. And there really is a disconnect between what needs to be done and our capacity to do that at this point. Partnerships are key here. And the private sector is also very interested in helping in this regard, and there are some dialogues underway about how to take advantage of that. But I think this will continue to be a very significant challenge, especially in a resource-constrained environment, which we are in with respect to the federal government right now. We at NOAA, for example, depend very heavily on the Coast Guard vessels, and those are in dire need of new vessels and fixing the existing ones. So there are operating, as you well know, in that environment takes very specialized and appropriate equipment, and making the case for why that is important is something that we collectively need help in doing.
Thank you again, Dr. Lubchenco, for being here today and for announcing NOAA's vision for the Arctic.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
We've got a full agenda here, and if you don't mind, I think I'm just going to march right through it with our group. They're used to it a little bit. I want just to do a little bit of orientation, and then I'm going to ask Brooks Yeager from Clean Air, Cool Planet, who was a special advisor to the Commission, to kind of help us orient and get started. You have a copy of the report. There is part 1 and part 2. This is mainly part 1. There is a marine spatial planning guide for the Arctic that was created by Charles Ehler for us while we were working on this report, and it's a separate document that's available online. And if you want copies, we can probably get them to you. There's a lot in here, but we're going to try to organize it according to who's here and work through the major findings or recommendations in pretty quick order, and then allow some time for an exchange or discussion about what you may be wondering or what questions we didn't get to answer within the Commission and the dialogue. But first, let me announce who's here. Some of you probably know everyone up here, but let me quickly, I just identified Brooks Yeager to my right. To his right is Lisa Spear. She's the director of the International Oceans Program for NRDC. To her right is Willem Eichbaum. He is the VP and Managing Director for the Marine Portfolio at WWF here in the United States. To his right is Robert Blau. He is a Senior Advisor for Global Arctic Theme at Shell. And then to his right is Rich Powell. Rich is a special advisor to the commissioners who you saw in the video, to Sheila Watt-Cloutier and Patricia Cochran, and we thank you all for being here. To my left is, of course, Dr. Sylvia Earle. She will have some comments on the commission. To her left is Sven Lindblad. He is, of course, the president and founder of Lindblad Expeditions, who helped us launch this commission aboard the Arctic Summit, the Climate Change Summit in 2008. And to his left is J.B. Kelly, who was our commission level representative for Prince Albert and the Prince Albert Foundation. And then we do also have Terry Garcia here. Terry, like others, were present for the National Commission on the BP oil spill, and we've asked him here to say to offer some comments on the Arctic portions of that report. And David Bolton, who you all know as the ambassador to the oceans, and is going to give us some comments from our State Department. So let me get started. Brooks, if you would, could you help orient why this report, where it fits within the dialogue on the Arctic? I think you know that this commission was a civil society commission. What we mean by that is that we drew upon leaders from both the environmental community, from business. We did not have specifically government representation because we wanted to free the hand of the commission to be open to talk about things other than actual standard or set policy. And I think that served the commission well. At the same time, however, we did ask government representatives to join us in the discussion, knowing that they were limited at times by what they could say, but they were a source of expertise and a source of education for the commission. So let me stop there and ask Brooks to give it a spin, if you will.
Thanks, David. I think I should say David asked me to basically give a very quick sort of 30,000-foot view of the context, and so I will be quick. Administrator Lubchenco has already covered a lot of the ground in terms of the changes that are taking place and what needs to be responded to, so I will not try to repeat her eloquent words on that. But as we are talking today, the senior Arctic officials of the 8 Arctic nations, the representatives that we have to the entity called the Arctic Council, are meeting in Copenhagen. And in 2 months, their foreign ministers, including, we hope, Secretary Clinton, are scheduled to meet in Nuuk in Greenland. This report is addressed not just to the U.S. government, but to all the Arctic governments and to the community of experts and others that currently are the family of the Arctic Council. The Arctic Council and the Arctic governments are definitely starting to take the first steps to grapple with the challenge of a changing Arctic. And the question is whether they'll interpret that challenge broadly or narrowly. There doesn't seem to be any question, as Dr. Lubchenco said, that the scale of the change that's facing the Arctic is unprecedented, it's rapid, and its consequences will be profound. This Aspen Commission and the report that it's issued calls for an equally profound response. At a time when a lot of attention is focused on boundary disputes and potential national claims on resources in the Arctic Ocean, this report calls for a new level of cooperation among the Arctic nations. In addition to the focus on security implications, which comes so naturally in Washington and which to some extent has been provoked by the recession of the Arctic sea ice, this report calls for an equal focus on the management needs that change in the Arctic will bring. The Commission recognized that the demand for oil, the world's demand for oil, for fish, for efficient transportation, will put new pressure on Arctic resources. In response to that, the Commission has urged the development of a conservation and sustainable development plan for the Arctic marine environment. And by plan in that sense, I don't think they mean blueprint, although others will talk about that, but they mean agenda. They mean ongoing effort that's structured and managed well at the level of the Arctic Council and among the Arctic nations. The report recognizes that higher standards will be needed in many sectors of activity, and it calls for them. And we were particularly happy to have the participation of key private sector commissioners and delegates to the working group that helped us with this. But it also calls for a new kind of planning and management, a more coordinated approach by the Arctic nations that embraces all sectors and all activities. This ecosystem-based approach has been used successfully by Norway in the Barents Sea, and is at the center of the new U.S. oceans policy. And since the Canadian ambassador is here, hello, Ambassador Dora, I would also say that Canada has been doing work in this area, we know, in the Beaufort and north of the Mackenzie Delta. The Commission believes this approach can help conserve the wildlife and fisheries that make the Arctic unique, and it also helps shape economic activities more sustainably. The Commission report also urges a new, more inclusive approach to governance and decision-making. This is something that the administrator referred to and David referred to in terms of a network of not just information, but institutions, both governmental and non-governmental, that can be relied on to help shape the decisions that make a more sustainable Arctic. Enhancing the role of indigenous peoples in Arctic governance and recognizing their unique standing is essential to this. Better integrating science, local knowledge, and private sector expertise is also critical. Finally, the Commission encourages a stronger Arctic Council that acts as a hub and a coordinating center for this new agenda. We can take heart that the senior Arctic officials are even now considering steps to strengthen the Council. We hope for even more good news soon, as they and the Arctic governments take up the broader agenda to strengthen the institutions for cooperation and sustainable development as the Commission has recommended. And I just want to say one word also, that great credit is due not just to the Commission and to the members of the working group, I think, for working their way through all this, but particularly to David Monsma for leading this process for more than 2 years, to Francesca Cava for making it possible and delivering information and great ideas during a whole long part of this process, and to her predecessor, Reagan Nelson, who helped with that as well. So,
Thank you.
yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Brooks. And just so I'm going to keep moving here, and just to give you an orientation, if you look in the report, there is a list of commissioners. Those are the kind of prominent people that you probably all know by name. But also working for them, each of them had a delegate or representative, because the hard work was done by the people at this table here. And Lisa Spear is among the hardest working. I think, in fact, we have the hardest working people because they're the ones who showed up. So Lisa, that's right.
Thank you, David. I just want to start by saying that Frances Speinecke, who is a commissioner on this commission as well as on the Deepwater Horizon Commission, really wanted to be here today, and she apologizes for not being able to. She's in Turkey at a wedding, so she's enjoying herself. I wanted to just make a couple of brief remarks building off of what Jane said about the Arctic being an opportunity to get it right, to get out ahead of oil and gas development, fishing, shipping, and other activities in the ocean, and avoid the kind of crippling overfishing, pollution, and other ecological catastrophic developments that have so compromised so many of our ocean resources. I think it's fair to say that the Commission feels that we are at a critical point in time, and that there is an opportunity, a window of opportunity to act, to begin to plan for in a rational and ecosystem-based way for the development that is coming at us. And it is going to come at us quickly, some more quickly than others. The Arctic contains about a fifth of the world's remaining undiscovered oil and gas. 84% of the oil component of that is offshore. Some of the world's richest fisheries are located in the subarctic and already are moving into the Arctic in increasing numbers. We are unprepared. There is no international fisheries management organization that is capable of managing fisheries throughout much of the Arctic, particularly on our side of the Arctic. There are no international standards mandatory standards governing offshore oil and gas development. We are not prepared for a major spill in the Arctic. And we are lacking in international mechanisms for assessing and mitigating the effects of multiple industrial activities on single ecosystems. We have no international mechanisms for establishing networks of protected areas that are linked together. On almost every front, we are behind the curve, and we need to move quickly. There is an opportunity that Brooks mentioned and that Undersecretary Lubchenco mentioned as well, coming up in May when the 8 foreign ministers of the Arctic countries will gather in Nuuk to talk about what the agenda will be for the next 2 years. This, we think, is a critical opportunity to begin to get in plans for the kind of integrated ecosystem-based management that is at the center of the Aspen report. And we hope very much that the governments going into that meeting will come together and not postpone taking action now to begin the process. We don't have a lot of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Just so you know that if you're looking through the report, you'll see 10 principles and 8 substantive recommendations. The principles were created by the working group and by the commission to guide its work, to inform how it made the recommendations. And then the 8 substantive are policy recommendations that form the report, so it's not to be confused about them. I will turn now to you, Bill, if we could.
Thank you very much, David, and I'd like to add my thoughts about congratulating the Aspen Institute and the staff for supporting this effort for more than 2 years. And Jim Leap, who you saw in the video, was the commissioner on behalf of World Wildlife Fund and is very actively interested moving now from this report to the implementation of its recommendations. As is usually the case by now, everything I was going to say has been said, so I've been rapidly jotting down a few notes that sounds like I have something thoughtful to add rather than repeat. But happily, it'll be briefer than I would have otherwise been. First of all, one of the things that the Commission did was look at a number of options for how you would strengthen the governance of the Arctic. And those range from strengthening the Arctic Council, to strengthening the very complex system of arrangements that does exist, to actually moving to perhaps a new treaty-based approach for our regional seas, such as exists in the Caribbean or the Mediterranean. The Commission did not choose one of those options. It identified them, but as David just said, it rather set forth a series of principles that any system of strengthened governance needed to be able to adhere to and implement. And then it made a series of recommendations about how actual actions could be taken by governments and others to begin to achieve those principles. And the one thing I would say about those recommendations, and they're in the report, you can read them, is that they're not a shopping list. They're not something that you can go and pick one and be partway there, or pick 3 of them and think, well, this will be pretty good. These all really need to be done if the governments and society, civil society, economic society, the people that live in the Arctic are going to have a sustainable future, both for the livelihoods of the people that live there and for the environmental values that are in the Arctic. So look at this as a whole, and that reflects the view that Dr. Lubchenco really infused into the work of the Commission right from the beginning, even with her limited role as she took on her duties at NOAA, which is the integrated approach and the idea that the sectoral management we've done in the past, or the non-management as we've exploited oceans, has not worked. All those seas have degraded, and as she said, we do in the Arctic have a chance, as governments and as civil society and economic forces, a chance to get it right. The Commission did say that the first place and the greatest opportunity to make progress is with the existing mechanism, the Arctic Council. So if we have the decisions coming out of the ministerial meeting that have been alluded to, that will be the beginning of the creation of an armature that is stronger, that is more robust, around which all of those who are interested in the successful governance of the Arctic can play a role. That really brings me to my next to last point, which is this idea of open source networks for participating in the governance process. This was an idea that was injected into the work of the Commission by Lloyd Axworthy, former Foreign Minister of Canada, and it was based on some of his own experience as Foreign Minister, particularly in seeing the role that civil society played in the development of the Landmines Treaty, where, while that was ultimately a decision of governments, it was heavily influenced by civil society, and its implementation has an engagement by civil society. And the notion is that by participation, by information, by transparency by governments, by a range of features which are only beginning to be understood and teased out, the possibility of having governance be more successful and more sustainable over time offers a new way to govern complex, international, regional, or perhaps even global issues and problems. And that takes me to my last point, which is I think the ideas and suggestions, if taken on board by these governments, by the other forces that are interested in the Arctic, if that is done successfully, and it will take time to know how that would really work, it may be a real new model for how we address some of the most complicated and thus far apparently intractable global problems that face society. So this report, I think, speaks strongly to the Arctic, but I think it also speaks strongly to issues of international, environmental, and sustainable use of our planet's finite resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I think you pointed out very well that, in fact, while you try to look for ways to improve governance, that governance itself is changing, and we try to bring about some of the insights from the Commission about how that would take place in the Arctic. Robert, we turn to you, too. It's not insignificant that you were the only oil and gas company on the Commission. We thank you for that and like to hear your comments.
Yeah, thank you, David. It's great to be here today representing Shell and the Commissioner David Lawrence, who couldn't be here today for the launch of the Shared Future. I've been working with the Arctic Climate Change Commission since April 2009, when we all met in Monaco and had a great time. Whereas drilling for oil and gas in the Arctic does not resonate with everybody, it is important to work with a wide group of stakeholders and carefully listen to what they have to say and what the concerns are. The calls for international cooperation in sustainable development planning, harmonized Arctic standards and science programs, as reflected in the Arctic Climate Change Commission's recommendations, are very helpful in Shell's Arctic strategy and the communication around it. You have asked me to make some comments on partnerships, and partnerships, that is what we do for a living. So I wrote a really short story, succinct, and I thought I could do it in the time, and I went through it this morning and it took 10 minutes. So what I will do when we go along, I'll make the cuts to keep it in within 5 minutes, and thanks to my friend Bill, he gave me some time. So in our industry, effective partnerships are vital for our long-term sustainable presence in the various countries we operate. In many countries, we have been working already for a century or more, and without strong and mutually beneficial and sustainable relationships with host governments, local communities, regulators, government agencies, and other stakeholders, this would not have been possible. Indeed, the administrator mentioned her top priorities on science, on sea ice, on weather and oil spill response. And actually, we're very happy that we work with NOAA on all these four top priorities at present in 2011. Now, we often in our industry work in joint ventures and include national oil companies and other private oil companies. In the subarctic, the national oil company partners are as diverse as mighty Gazprom and Russia, which have massive gas operations and 367,000 employees. And on the other hand, the recently founded NOAA Oil in Greenland, which I believe have 10 employees. So NOCs are our key area of interest for Shell, and we continue to cooperate with all of them. I'm happy that Rich is sitting on my left hand, looking after the interest of indigenous people, since it's very important to work with indigenous people and their organizations. As was clearly communicated earlier, development activity may have a significant impact on traditional lifestyle and at the same time may provide sustainable benefits. A most recent example of collaboratively working in partnership with the people of the region was the signing last September of a science agreement between the North Slope Borough in Alaska and Shell. And that will enable Arctic residents of the coastal villages to gain robust answers to key questions and concerns related to the effects and impacts of oil and gas. In Alaska, there are also agreements on seasonal windows of our operations outside whaling periods and minimization of discharges and emissions of drilling operations. At the global level, we work with our strategic partner for communities, First Peoples Worldwide, and I'll meet them tomorrow here in Washington. Now, in order to minimize the footprint in the areas of operation and reduce costs, cooperation with other operators as partners on search and rescue, oil spill prevention and response capability, science programs, and logistics in general is an absolute must. And we do this through local and global trade associations and joint industry projects. As was mentioned already by all the previous speakers, the Arctic features a unique and fragile environment, and responsible management of operations to avoid a negative impact on biodiversity is imperative. And this calls for a thorough understanding of the ecosystem in cooperation with environmental scientists and marine biologists. In Alaska, the former MMS and industry together have spent more than $500 million over the last couple of decades in preparation for oil and gas offshore. So contrary to common belief, for instance, we have a really good holistic understanding of the ecosystems of the Chukchi Sea. Now, with our environmental strategic partners, we work to better understand Arctic biodiversity and obtain a scientific support for the work we do. And we work with IUCN, Wetlands International, the Nature Conservancy, and Earthwatch as our environmental strategic partners. Now then there's technology, and that supports both exploration and development aimed at improving safety of our operations in ice and harsh conditions and extending capabilities. Reducing costs, reduce operating footprints, and work on oil spill prevention and response. R&D programs are very costly, and especially in the Arctic. So there it is a must to work with industry partners and scientists on joint industry projects to limit that footprint. I will make some shortcuts in lieu of time. Well, these are just a few examples of our partnerships, but I wanted to sketch a picture that in our projects and our long-term presence in Arctic, it is a prerequisite to work with others to responsibly find, develop, and operate oil and gas in the Arctic for the benefit of stakeholders. And we are always looking forward to mutually constructive dialogue with all Arctic players. And personally, I have found that environment in the Aspen Arctic Climate Change Commission, and that was very, very beneficial for my own edification, but definitely for Shell and the business that I represent. Now, finally, if there's one small issue, and David, we have shared that before on the Aspen Arctic Climate Change Commission, it is the limited participation of the private industry sector in the work. And I think that collectively, the private industry sector needs to step to the plate and shoulder the responsibility. So building on the shared future, Shell is launching a project entitled a Cross-Sector Assessment and stakeholder process for future Arctic industry development. And it also builds on Lisa's comment too, who said that very little is known about the cumulative impact of the various sectors, whether it be oil and gas or fishing, tourism, shipping, military, all of them combined. We worked that project with our IUCN partner, and we're looking for more participants and sponsors to the project from all sectors, government, public policy advisors, indigenous peoples organizations, NGOs, and academia. I will leave some one-page flyers here for you to study, and also the contact details for those are there if you want to have more information or participate in the project. Well, David, this was my 5 minutes worth. Thank you so much. I look forward to any questions you may have later on.
All right, great. Thank you, Robert. And just so people are wondering whether we spent all of our time in Monaco, of course, our partner was Prince Albert. We also went to Barrows Point and to Fairbanks and tried to avail ourselves of knowledge and experience from both our European and North American counterparts. Rich Powell, you played a special role. I want to acknowledge this. We have commission level people that are so busy, it's very hard to get them together. You did a mighty job in helping us understand and follow through with the interests of Sheila Watt-Cloutier and for Patricia Corcoran, and thank you for being here.
So first, thanks very much to David and to Aspen for convening us here today and convening this commission. I know that both of my commissioners, Sheila Watt-Cloutier and Patricia Corcoran, for those of you who don't know, both former international chairs of Inuit Circumpolar Council, are very grateful for their participation here and for Aspen's support in this process. I'll try to take my cues from Lisa and Bill and be as brief as possible. I can promise that I won't be quite as long as Robert's remarks, but So first, I do bring greetings from both Sheila and Patricia, and I'll say that both of their inability to be here today is actually symptomatic of an issue, and maybe the issue facing Arctic indigenous peoples, which is I'll call these the 4 twos, that there are too few Arctic indigenous leaders operating globally, stretched across too many commitments globally, with too little technical assistance, facing too few resources. And so I think the Commission very thoughtfully engaged deeply in this issue, and I'll echo Sheila here, who's always encouraging us to take bold and principled action on global environmental issues. I think we could have taken the sort of easy out and made as recommendations some platitudes about greater involvement of indigenous people in issues, and we have made some of those statements, not platitudes, but strong statements, but we went deeper into trying to address the fundamental problem of the lack of resources for Arctic indigenous peoples to actually participate in the regional and international decision-making processes that impact their lives. And the fundamental conclusion, based on feedback from Commissioner Axworthy and many others, was that the way to solve this is to have Arctic indigenous peoples pay for that themselves, and to ensure that they have the resources to do so through deep and meaningful participation in the development of the Arctic. So I encourage everyone to look at the entire report, obviously, but in particular recommendation 6, where the Commission encourages all Arctic states to recognize the unique rights of Arctic indigenous peoples to share and actively participate in the development of their lands and territories and resources. So at a high level, I think that is probably the single most important statement that this Commission has made with respect to indigenous peoples. I would normally take this time to also remind us of some of the impacts of Arctic climate change on Arctic indigenous peoples, but Administrator Lubchenco did that wonderfully, so I'll share just one other comment that Sheila had hoped I'd share, which is that she was deeply distressed this December to see in Pangnirtung in the Arctic, near her home in Iqaluit, that at a time when the sea ice would be well underway in its formation, Inuit were still boating openly on the ocean in areas that always would have been covered with ice. So, deeply distressing. But to point to some other very important developments, I think, in the recommendations with respect to indigenous peoples, we took very important steps here to recognize the network effects of information and the network possibilities of information to allow participation in decision-making supplementary to traditional decision-making processes. And these kind of areas are places where indigenous peoples, who are as Sheila says, the ground truthers of climate change in the Arctic, have a real ability to share their unique holistic understanding of the Arctic and its environment into regional and international decision-making processes. And from the beginning, David and the Aspen Institute were sure to ensure deep Indigenous participation in this commission through 2 Indigenous commissioners. And as well, at our last meeting in August, we had the opportunity to meet with a group of Arctic Indigenous leaders and share with them the preliminary findings of the commission. I'm very happy to report that one of the major findings, the emphasis on marine spatial planning, struck a real chord with some of the indigenous peoples who were able to attend. Folks will note that there is what are we calling it, an appendix, an addendum, a supplement?
Part 2.
Part 2 of the Aspen recommendations are the Bud Ehler's report on the benefits of marine spatial planning. And some of those Arctic indigenous leaders from Canada who were there sort of took to heart the marine spatial planning efforts undertaken by other First Nations people in British Columbia, and are now actually traveling to British Columbia to meet with them with the hopes of replicating a similar holistic cross-sector approach to planning the use and reconciling the conflicting uses of their marine resources. So with all that said, I think I clocked in under Robert, and I'll finish here. Thanks.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you very much, and our best to Sheila and to Patricia. I want to keep moving on here and ask if you, Dr. Sylvia Earle, would share some comments, and then Sven and JB as commissioners who oversaw this process. And I also need to point a special note, Sylvia is a trustee of the Aspen Institute, and it was with her encouragement and strength that allowed this program to seek further into this issue and be able to bring it about as a commission.
Thank you, David. Yes, I did have a special perspective from the time that discussions were bouncing around at the Aspen Institute about the worthiness of undertaking this project, and it's gratifying to see where it has come. It will be even more gratifying to see where it goes. It seems as though we have now reached a conclusion. I mean, we have this document, but I'd like to think this marks the beginning of where this is going to have an impact. This is, as we've been hearing with all the comments, a moment in history. Of the issues that are now being raised, because they couldn't be. We didn't have the access that is now there, the problems that are now obvious, that weren't problems when I was a kid. And I'm haunted by the thought that the kids of the future are going to look back at right now and say, either you really got it, you understood that there was a moment in time to take action or not take action, depending on what would be the maximum value for the interests of the future, not just the interests of the present, but we'll take actions that will determine all that follows, not just for the next 10 or 100, but for all of the future. These are forever coming decisions. And while an effort is clearly made to show particular respect for the vested interests of the people who live in the Arctic and the countries who have some jurisdiction over Arctic interests, a recognition that this, as Administrator Lubchenco pointed out, that this affects all of the world, and we're all indigenous to Earth, so we all have a vested interest in what happens. It should be so that the nations around the Arctic and the people, certainly who've lived there the longest, should have a magnified voice. They have a magnified interest, but it does influence everyone, everywhere, for all time. So it adds weight to the deliberations that are now being made by the countries and the people who live there. I think this look at this as a document of hope. I'll tell you why I think so, in particular. The polar bears who live in the Arctic may be aware that things are changing. They may be aware of it in terms of food, shelter, whatever it is. But they don't know why things are changing. And they don't know what to do about it either. And they're certainly not gathering in meetings such as this to ask the questions, why, what's happening, or to plan what to do as a consequence of the events. We are the best hope, we humans. We're the troublemakers, but we're also the ones who have the power to do something about it. So, I really want to salute all of those who are involved with putting the best that they could come up with to evaluate where we are and where we need to be as we go forward. At the Aspen Institute, Goethe is often quoted about, "It is not enough to know, you must also act." Well, before we act, we should know more. And one of the great outcomes of this is the magnitude of ignorance. We know about the possibility of fish. We know about the existence of the commercial value of oil and gas and whatever else that we can put on a balance sheet by today's standards of what matters economically. But we also need to think about the big balance sheet of Earth as the big bank account, our life support system, and the Arctic as a key part of what makes the planet function as it does. So I just want to thank all of those who participated and hope that we all take to heart the challenge. All right, here it is. Now let's go forth and use it and act upon it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Sven, if you could, I want to thank Sven for really championing an Arctic and climate change question mark that presented itself in 2007 and 2008 with Clean Air, Cool Planet and National Geographic when we did an expedition that was largely about climate change, but also it took place in the Arctic.
David wanted me to speak a little bit about the relevance of this report. And of course, everyone in this room and many others will have to judge that in time. And I hope that judgment will be a good judgment, and as Sylvia said, that it will be the beginning of something moving forward. I did want to just say a couple of words about the process, because behind everything like this, there is a process, and it's sometimes a beautiful one and sometimes less so. Lest anybody think this was just a bunch of people who got together and basically had a few drinks and hung around in Monaco and then basically agreed with each other. Not at all. It was incredibly fierce disagreement about more or less everything that is in this report, but true to Aspen, it was civil disagreement.
Mostly.
In most cases. There were late-night conference calls. Robert, you were responsible for a lot of those. Back then. There were people who wondered whether they could continue on the commission because it might put them in political peril. But nevertheless, and then David kept saying to us all on a regular basis, trust the process, which he's very good at saying and very good at enforcing. So at the end of the day, empathy grew between this group of people. I think the realization that this was indeed a huge challenge that had lots of implications, that it was by no means easy to get to a good place where 8 different countries and lots of different communities and different business interests and environmentalists could fundamentally agree on a path forward. And I personally felt very, very privileged to be part of this. And I really thank the Aspen Institute for taking this on, and hopefully this will help us all get to a better place in the Arctic and globally. Thanks.
Thank you, Sven. JB Kelly, John Kelly is here on behalf of the Prince Albert II of Monaco and the Prince Albert Foundation, who we we're very grateful to. You are our partner in helping us manage this process and being able to bring it about. So thank you for being here, JB.
Thank you, David, and thank you, everybody. On behalf of Prince Albert, I want to thank the Aspen Institute for providing this opportunity. This is precisely the kind of activity that Albert envisioned and wanted to support when he established his foundation in 2006. Not only was it international, not only did it involve a diversity of opinion to bring about and call attention to a grave issue, the issue itself is one of great personal interest to Albert. And if my colleagues from the working committee will indulge to hear the brief story, I'll share it for the others. But Albert has a personal history through his family with the Arctic. His great-great-grandfather, Prince Albert I, was an Arctic explorer at the turn of the last century. And though Monaco is a small country, it has a great scientific tradition established by Albert I. Prince Albert in 2004, I think the only head of state to ever be to the North Pole, was replicating.
Dog sled.
Yes. Replicated his, actually went further than his great-grandfather, who had not made it to the North Pole, but replicated as part of his great-great-grandfather's Arctic exploration. And this is where it became very personal to him. He was able to stand in front where Albert I had stood, which had been in front of a great glacier. The glacier was then 100 years later 15 miles further up the fjord. So it has a photograph of his grandfather and then a photograph of himself. He was able to personally see the garbage that we all throw out and roll down into the drain here on the street that ends up on the beaches of these Arctic islands. So for him, it became very personal. He returned from the Arctic, established his foundation, and is very proud to be funding this project, calling attention to this particular issue as well as other environmental issues. There's a cliche that the Arctic is the canary in the coal mine. I think everybody understands that. It's a good warning system. The only problem is the canary dies. And for the people who depend upon the canary, obviously the indigenous people of the Arctic depend on the Arctic for their livelihood, but we all depend on it. It is the cooling system for our planet, the feedback that will happen by release of methane and carbon from the permafrost will make it devastating to all of us if this canary dies.
Thank you, JB, and thank you to Bernard Fortier and Lionel Schutz from the foundation who have been so instrumental in helping us manage the process. I want to quickly turn to Terry and David to add some thoughts from a different background, obviously we hope relevant to your work and to ours.
Okay. As David mentioned, I was one of the 7 commissioners appointed by the President to investigate the Deepwater Horizon explosion, make recommendations, or commission rather, to make recommendations on how we could prevent a recurrence of such an event and mitigate the impact should one occur in the future. But I'll start with something Bill said. As a former senator noted, everything has been said, it just hasn't been said by everyone. So I'm going to remedy that now. Well, maybe not quite. But quickly, some of the key findings of the commission. The explosion on the Macondo well, or the Deepwater Horizon rig, did not have to happen. It was completely foreseeable and preventable, which, by the way, makes the death of the 11 men all the more tragic. It was the result of multiple failures at multiple levels. It involved errors and misjudgments by 3 major corporations, which, by the way, are operating in every deep water or offshore oil field on the planet. It was, and this is a key point, it was not the result of a rogue player. It was systemic. Within the industry. That's a very controversial finding. Certainly it annoys the responsible players such as Shell. But the reason we said that is that, number one, because of those 3 companies, they are in every major oil field, and we didn't feel that they had made the mistakes in the Gulf just because they were working for BP or that they were in the Gulf. Rather, these were practices that were taking place around the world. Number 2, not a single member of the industry at the time of this blowout had the capability of responding effectively or containing it. Further, there was a failure on the part of the government. There was a failure to effectively oversee the industry. There was a failure within the system which allowed an agency to both oversee the collection of royalties and to oversee the safety of an industry. And we made a series of recommendations on how to address that. There was, and this is pertinent to what you all have found, there was a lack of consultation also within the government, or effective consultation with the experts. So the former Minerals Management Service did not effectively consult with the Coast Guard, nor did it effectively consult with NOAA. And we've made recommendations on how to address that. Finally, there was a dearth of information, a dearth of data about the ecosystem in which this occurred. Frankly, we might as well have been on the moon for all we knew about the area around the Macondo well at 5,000 feet below the surface. That lack of information hampered the response, it hampered the containment, and it will hamper the damage assessment process that's going forward. Now, as far as the Arctic, many of the deficiencies that we identified in the Gulf apply equally to the Arctic. There is a knowledge gap. There's certainly a gap as to the ecosystem, and the same problems that were encountered in the Gulf will be encountered in the Arctic if there is a spill. That is, it will hamper our ability to respond, to contain, and to assess the damage. There is a knowledge gap about the effectiveness of various oil spill response techniques, partly because we know very little about how oil and ice behave, and there is a need for further research to inform decisions that are made about permitting drilling. There's a question as to whether we have fully taken into account the differences between exploration and production in the Arctic. They involve very different things. The risk may be very different. The response and containment that's required for ensuring that you have the capacity to address an event involving an exploration well may be very different from one in which it is a production well. The federal response capability we found is lacking. The nearest base for the Coast Guard is Kodiak. That must be addressed by the government and by industry. The industry and the government have to get together, and they're going to have to decide how are we going to manage such an event. And finally, there is a lack of international standards that would govern how the international community is going to proceed to drill in the Arctic. One of the big concerns we had was that there are many countries out there that are also involved in this. The government and the public in ensuring that sorry to speed through it, but
No, I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Terry. And if there are questions, we can get to those in a minute. But before we end, from our working group members and commissioners, I'd also, David, you've kind of been with us from the beginning, and you sit in a pivotal position in helping interpret what civil society says and what government ultimately will decide. And so I want to give you an opportunity to explain yourself.
No pressure. Good luck with that.
Just
Thanks
kidding.
very much. That's okay. Let me start by offering my congratulations as well to you, to the Aspen Commission, to all the people who participated, including the Prince Albert II Foundation, in producing this report. I did have the privilege of sitting in on a number of the sessions. It was mostly for me a learning opportunity. There were a lot of smart people around a lot of tables, and I learned quite a lot, and my contribution was mostly that of a pest. I was there to try to offer the perspective of how governments might receive different types of recommendations that could come forward. And I think the success of the Commission is all the more noteworthy in that they were not shooting at a still target, but rather a moving target. A lot has been happening in the Arctic over the course of the life of the Commission. And the fact that the Commission's recommendations are still so pertinent and relevant says a lot to your abilities to anticipate where we are. And where are we? Well, I would say that certainly for the U.S. government, and perhaps I can speak for the other Arctic governments as well, there is a new willingness to try to address the very problems that you, NOAA, and its Arctic vision have been laying out. The Arctic is changing. Climate change and other drivers really are creating a new world. And it's not an easy one to manage, and governments really do need to step up. The forum we have right now is the Arctic Council. And as we speak, we are seeing that council being transformed. We have an historic meeting coming up in May. A number of people mentioned it. And it's my sense that we will see emerging from that meeting a stronger and more effective council. I think the United States certainly will support that. And an agenda to take up some of the issues that you and others are calling on us to take up, including dealing with the potential for oil spills in the Arctic, including dealing with Arctic marine environment on an ecosystem basis. Terry is right. The governments are woefully ill-prepared to deal with the potential for a spill, and Sylvia is right, too, that we still don't know a lot. So there's a big agenda out there to pursue, and the recommendations coming forward from the Commission, I think, will help us get there. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Yeah, we don't know what we don't know, to coin a phrase. Any questions or comments from all of you? I know that we've taken up a lot of your time this afternoon. I really appreciate you being here, but I can't help feel that even within our group here, we have new questions for ourselves.
Yeah, where now? What's next?
Yeah, sure, Kelly, thank you. Yeah.
Well, actually, I'm happy to have heard you say something about what I would call data accessibility and interoperability. It's one of the things, as a government agency that's really pushed the Arctic Observing Network concept and led the way in that we realize is essential. And it's front and center on our agenda for sure. But it's helpful for the many sectors, and I learned about some new data sources today, in fact, to be speaking with one voice on the need for that. What Jane referred to is basically an effort to elevate or impetus to coordinate the Interagency Arctic Policy Committee. Now, that committee was established in 1984, and the way it was set up was that the Arctic had the NSF had the chair of the committee, and it gathered together all of the agencies, and they were to determine, they produced a 5-year plan to determine what might be missing and make recommendations. It was pretty clear with all the changes we're experiencing in the Arctic that this is the time to reinvigorate that process. And what is happening, there was a presidential memorandum released on the 22nd of July in 2010 and interpreted through the Holdren's operation. And basically saying the National Science and Technology Council is going to help coordinate elements of it and ensure there is a lot more data across stuff. So within NSF, we will need our directors to be directly chair of that. We have hired at a executive service level a person whose job, among other things, is principally to help push that forward on behalf of the director. His name is Brendan Kelly. He's from Alaska and has a long-standing 25-year or more research career looking at Arctic marine mammals, polar bear and seals in particular. So he will be helping to push that agenda forward, and we're expecting to hold meetings within the month to get that whole process going. But again, this notion of data is probably a very important agenda item for all of us. So that's just elaborating on the point that Jane brought up.
Thank you, Kelly. Any other comments from the working group members or commissioners? Yes, Anne?
Oh, you have a new system, so I don't need to push the button? Or?
Well, supposedly.
Okay, thank you. I'm DCM at the Danish Embassy and representing, therefore, a country who has the presidency of the Arctic country, which has been mentioned a couple of times today. And I'm particularly glad to see a recommendation where you focus on building on the Arctic Council as the forum where we can move.
Yes.
There has been lots of questioning whether it was efficient enough, whether it could do what's needed to do, and it's certainly not the only forum where we can move forward. But our experience as being an Arctic nation because of Greenland, we find that is we can see that over the years it has developed into something that you can definitely build upon. We also hope that when we come to Nuuk, we can solve the outstanding institutional questions on observers, on the permanent secretariat, etc. Because if we continue discussing these institutional questions, we cannot move on with what is definitely necessary. And what is necessary is to take decisions on, what all the issues that you have touched upon today. So that is a major step forward for us, that we can move forward in that respect, and we definitely hope that will be possible. One question for you, being a European, rather new to the United States. Being European, we can see that the link between what is happening in the Arctic and the public awareness in our countries is there. People know that their day-to-day behavior has an impact on what's happening up there. But I don't see that in the United States. How do you bridge that gap that we have today?
Every way you can.
You want to respond? It's a great question.
Yeah.
It's one that's on our mind, in fact. But
right.
Bill?
Well, I'll just say one thing, and Terry Garcia is here and from the National Geographic, and I think communications and partnerships between the traditional communities that have been concerned with this issue and perhaps communities that have dealt with it, can deal with it in a broader perspective and with expertise, both on the science side as well as on the communication side, I think is a great asset and a great opportunity to move these issues into future broader public awareness. And there's some other things that are going to be happening over the next year that will do that, so don't despair.
Well, I think that many people seem to have the impression that it's about the polar bears, it's about that place up there, rather than realizing that it really has a direct impact on all of us. We all have a vested interest. It doesn't matter where on the planet you live. What happens to the Arctic matters to us. And that's the bridge we have to form.
And I know you're here in part because of Denmark, and we didn't get a chance to hear from Ambassador Duer. He had to leave before we could get to him. I apologize for that. But I think I can speak on behalf of the Commission. One of our recommendations is, of course, calling for a diplomatic conference on the kind of integrated and coordinated effort that maybe builds upon the Arctic Council, but envisions something at least spatially wider and temporally longer than what we have in terms of our management system there. And we know that we look to that leadership in the United States, in Canada, and Denmark to recognize that there is an ability, an opportunity right now. You've had several great reports in the last few years, and we hope that the Arctic Council will be responsive to that, of course. All right, well, thank you all for being here, and I appreciate your coming. Oops, one more last comment. Lisa?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Brooks and Bill said about the Aspen Institute and its leadership in bringing this diverse group together. And Madeline Albright, Sylvia, and others, the staff, you, Francesca, Reagan, Tim, if he's here, all were just a terrific joy to work with, and we really are very grateful for the opportunity.
It's been an honor
Big
serving.
hand for the Aspen Institute.
Thank you.
David, would you take one more question?
Sure.
I'm Jerry Miller from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, where I'm the Assistant Director for Ocean Sciences. I would like to start by first thanking Kelly for for the point about RIPIC. We would hope that this group would engage with RIPIC once it gets going. And secondly, I believe that Jane may have mentioned that we now have, for the first time, a national ocean policy here in the U.S. It has 9 objectives, one of which is specifically focused on the Arctic. In fact, it's the only geographic area called out specifically in that policy. We have, as we speak, spun up writing teams to write strategic action plans for each of those 9 objectives. So it would be great if you folks would take what you've put together in this document and transmit the essence of that to us. We, of course, will look through what you've written, but we'd like your input as well. If you go to whitehouse.gov/oceans, you'll see a place where you can put comments on all of those objectives.
Oh, no, we'd much more prefer to do that in person.
Oh, yes. Okay. Here we are. Thank you for all of your hard work on this. It's going to be very productive for our purposes, I think.
Thank you, Jerry.
Yeah.
Thanks, you. Thanks again, everyone. Yeah, in the back room here in the executive room.